Happy New Year, everybody! Today we're going to talk about probably the most important concept in programming, more or less, as well as in HK, arrays. So, here we have three variables, and so far there are only three, but let's say we have 10 or 100, which store different values, and then we can use them in some fashion for something else. And say these variables are around the same theme. Maybe these variables store the colors that our GUI can potentially have. Say maybe you have a script that creates a GUI of a random color and you choose that color as the color of the clothes you wear for that day. Something like that. Well, if you don't know about arrays, you would do something like this, and it's not nice, really, because you would either have these weird-ass numbers after or some other scheme that unifies all of that data, but it's still separate data. Well, we could use an array instead. First of all, we can use the square brackets to create an array. The official method of doing this is using the array, I would say function, but it's actually a class. We're instantiating a class of the array. But I'm going to use square brackets because that's what I'm used to. And I recommend you use that yourself. Now, say there's red, green, and yellow. We have three items in an array. So red is the first one, then there's green, and then there's yellow. In most other programming languages, arrays hold on, Vim is difficult sometimes. Arrays start at 0. So in arrays, there are indexes and values. What you see currently, red, green, and yellow, are values, and they stay in separate places, which are called indexes. Usually they start with 0 in other programming languages. So red would be on index 0, but in HK, arrays are 1 indexed, so they start with 1. Which makes more sense for the human brain, but less so for the programmer brain. So, oh well. Index 1, then index 2, index 3. And say we want to display green. For that, we would use index 2. And that's it. We created the array using square brackets, and then we access the array using square brackets as well by providing the index to the value that we need. So when we run this, we get green. Great. Now, we don't necessarily need to fill the array immediately as we have it. Maybe there is some situation where you want an array and then fill it with data you get from somewhere else, and that might not be like immediate. Maybe you have a loop files that gathers your files, and then you want to have an array of the full paths to those files. Well, we can actually leave the array empty at first and then use the push method to add a new value to the array. So let's once again add red, green, and and blue. Now let's access the array again to get now the third index. And it works, as you would expect. Let's actually get the first one after. Here we go. Great. I have this huge ass array with English words as well as Russian words, and obviously I want to have a way to know how many there are here. Obviously I wouldn't count, obviously, but how do I count all this? You would probably think, a loop that does something and counts them, but no, it's actually way easier. You just use the length property, and arrays will have that, and the length property will tell you how many items there are in an array. I'm not showing off this example specifically because it's just in a function and it doesn't get returned as an object, whatever. Yeah, so you can get the length through that. Those two things you'll use most of the time, but here are the other methods and properties of arrays that exist. For example, when I learned that pop exists, which, well, removes and returns the last array element, I exploded because, wow, that's actually really useful in some situations. So check out the doc page for arrays. So say we have an array of numbers and we want to sort them. It's actually not that often that you come up in this situation, but say you do. Normal languages, like more sane languages compared to AHK, would just have this. You take the array object and then do sort, and here you go. But no, that's unfortunately not how you do it in AHK because there's no sort method. For some odd reason, V2 released recently and it still doesn't have a sort method. What the fuck? Yeah, so because of that reason, I made my own library with sorting stuff. I implemented a couple of algorithms and also some helpful stuff for when I was writing this library and testing it, like array to string, which turns an array into a string. I could show it off, but it's not really of importance here. Some other stuff as well. Bubble sort, one of the, if not, there's BOGO sort, which is worse, but that's pretty much the worst sorting algorithm. However, it's pretty simple. Then selection sort, which is a bit better, then insertion sort, which is a bit better, and merge sort, which you should use. I tested them on my machine for 100k indexes, 100,000 indexes. So insertion sort sorts 100 indexes, 100,000 indexes in 40 minutes. But merge sort does that in 4 seconds. Same amount, just very different algorithm in terms of the efficiency. Still, merge sort is not the fastest. The fastest is quick sort. I just haven't implemented it. But yeah. Oh, and also sleep sort, which usually doesn't really work, but it's really funny, which is a good reason to use something, to be fair. So you can use my library. I leave a link to my GitHub profile under every video in the description, and then you can check out the pinned project with my libraries called lib-v2. You'll find sort HK in there. While merge sort will usually work for most applications, yeah, it's not the fastest. But Thugby, still not quite sure how to pronounce that properly, has their own library for sorting arrays. So you can use that. I will leave a link in the description of this file. And Thugby's a legend. They're the one that made the V2 extension for VS Code, and they're a great programmer. A programmer whose code you can't read at all, but is good code in terms of the efficiency. So pick and choose which you like more. Yeah. So here we still have that array. We stored all of our data in a nice single structure, but when we try to use it, well, it's kind of ridiculous having to do this thing for each one of them, which is the reason why we don't. For loops, a way to make this a bit better. I'm going to explain how they work. Boom. So, this structure took me a second, to say the least, to understand. For loops in HK are actually called for each loops in other languages, but HK for loops are a bit better for each loops that do a bit less. So, what is key and what is value? Those are two variables that you set here. You can actually call them anything you want. So let's call them shit and piss. And when we pass piss into info, don't do that, please. I love that library so much. Yeah, it still works the same exact way, which means those are just names that you provide yourself. It's just a common practice to call them key value or index value, or maybe KV. Pick and choose what you like more. I just recommend that you keep consistent in how you name them. But actually, hold on. You don't have to specify both of them. You can, for example, specify only one variable. And in this case, it will continue to be value. So essentially, the first variable is optional. Maybe you need to use the index of your array. Maybe you don't. And if you don't, you can just provide value and use value itself. So the idea of this code is we change every single value to be 1 and then show them all so we can see what happened. And nothing did, because when you provide these variables, they only exist in this scope. They don't actually touch the array itself. They only get what it is once you get into the for loop. And essentially, they are not the actual values. They copy the values going through them. So a for loop starts at here. For this value, do the code in these brackets. When we finish, we go to the next index. Do code in these brackets, go to the next index until we run out of indexes. So we go through every one of them. And key value are just hints, essentially, for you to access those that data. If you try to change value, well, you just changed the variable value. You don't change the actual value of the array. And to actually change what the array is, you have to do it through this syntax. And now it should work, and it does. So if you want to use the value somewhere, maybe even modify it, you can safely use the value variable, and nothing in the original array will get changed. But if you want to change it, you have to use this syntax. So get the value of this index of this array. And when I showed off my sort library, that's essentially what happens. Not as obvious in the merge algorithm. Let's go to bubble sort. It's probably most obvious. See how we are in a for loop here, and we are changing the actual array, so we use this syntax. If we just used value, well, that wouldn't change anything and nothing would be sorted. I have shown off Descalada's string library before, but turns out they even have an array library as well, which you can use. There's slice, which is essentially substring, but for arrays, as far as I understood. Swap, which, I mean, this is not much code, but it's a nice abstraction for something this simple. And other stuff. And the cool thing about Descalada's libraries is that you can use these functions, well, maybe you can't even use them as functions. You use them as methods. So the same thing as like push, for example, same exact syntax. So essentially by using this library and including it, you can use all of those. So I will leave a link in the description for this library as well. Check it out. And it also, I think, yeah, it also has the sort method, but it's probably less efficient. It's not too terribly efficient. I think even my library has a more efficient method of doing this, but still, it's probably going to be good enough for most applications. If you're not doing anything too large scale, which you shouldn't do in AHK to begin with, then you're gonna be fine. Well, that's more or less it on arrays. And then actually I have a pretty big announcement. This was supposed to be a video for my second channel, and if you follow that, you might have seen that I haven't made a video in more than a month. Because it's actually really fucking difficult to make videos for that channel. They take a long time in writing the script, perfecting it, making the numerous screenshot for every frame and sometimes every word I say, and then also I have to record the audio in FL Studio, edit it, and then also edit it in DaVinci. Blah. When on this channel, my main channel, I can just go in, record, make the thumbnail, upload, and boom, I'm done. I can teach people with far less effort while still providing pretty useful content. And since I don't like to put in that much energy into videos anymore, I'll probably not be uploading it on my second channel. And videos that I wanted to make for that channel will instead appear on this one. So if you're just appeared here from the second channel, I really recommend subscribing, because one of the things that will be next on this channel, I will explain maps and how to use a static map with function objects for the runner, for example. It uses that. I'll explain that in a bit more detail, how to use a switch statement. I'll try to make a more concrete and full video on classes, explaining everything that I've been using in my videos. There are plenty of videos that I've made where I use classes for multiple projects that I have had. So watch those if you want to learn now. Then also a big video about GUIs. I am not sure how I'm gonna make that. Honestly, kinda scared, but oh well. How to use BiRef, which I personally have never used. So it's an interesting thing to discover and teach. And then also double DREF, which I have used, and it's actually pretty nice, but a really hacky way to solve some of the things you might encounter when you want to make something. As well as explaining the ternary operator and shorthanding if statements. Not sure how to call it. Essentially this and how it works. Many more things that I wanted to explain on the second channel will now be explained on this one. So, if you like this video, press a like, type some comment, maybe you have a question or a suggestion. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss my content, and now you know why you should, because damn, that's like good content. But most importantly, stay fresh, cheese bags, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!